The winter season had wrapped London in silver frost, yet nothing glittered more brightly than Hawthorne Manor on the evening of its annual Christmas ball. Beneath towering crystal chandeliers, hundreds of candles cast pools of golden light across polished marble floors. Silk gowns swept through grand halls like drifting clouds, while a string quartet filled the air with melodies so elegant they seemed woven from moonlight itself. To any observer, the gathering appeared flawless. Yet beneath the splendor lurked whispers sharp enough to wound. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne felt those whispers wherever she walked. She paused at the top of the sweeping staircase, one gloved hand resting lightly against the curve of her pregnant stomach. At 24, she possessed a quiet beauty that did not demand attention but lingered in memory. Her chestnut hair was arranged in delicate coils adorned with pearls, and her ivory gown flowed gracefully around her. Yet no jewel could conceal the sadness shadowing her eyes. The child she carried should have been a source of celebration. Instead, it had become the center of society's cruel fascination. As Eleanor descended the staircase, conversations softened. Ladies exchanged knowing glances behind painted fans. Gentlemen lowered their voices. Though their words were hidden, their meaning was not. The Duke scarcely appears beside her. They have become strangers. One wonders whether the marriage was ever truly affectionate. Each remark struck like a tiny stone against glass. Months earlier, Eleanor would have ignored such gossip. She had believed herself secure in the affection of her husband, Sebastian Hawthorne, Duke of Ashford. She had believed that whatever storms existed beyond their doors could never penetrate the sanctuary of their marriage. Now she was no longer certain. The distance between them had grown slowly, almost invisibly at first. A missed dinner. A shortened conversation. An unread letter left upon a desk. Then entire days passed without meaningful words between them. Sebastian buried himself in estate affairs and family obligations, while Eleanor found herself increasingly alone. Yet despite everything, she still loved him. Perhaps that was why the pain endured. Across the ballroom she finally spotted him. Sebastian stood near a towering window overlooking the snow-covered gardens. Tall and broad-shouldered, he possessed the commanding presence expected of a duke. Dark hair framed a face marked by sharp features and restrained intensity. Even among aristocrats, he seemed carved from a different substance altogether, something colder, harder, and infinitely more difficult to understand. Women admired him. Men respected him. Only Eleanor knew how lonely he truly was. For a moment she simply watched him. He appeared distracted, his gaze fixed beyond the glass where snowflakes drifted through darkness. The expression on his face was troubled, almost haunted. It reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with years ago, the man whose rare smiles had once felt like precious treasures. Hope stirred within her. Perhaps tonight could mend what had broken. Perhaps all they required was honesty. Gathering her courage, Eleanor crossed the ballroom. The crowd seemed to part around her. Every step felt heavier than the last. Somewhere deep inside, fear whispered that she would not like what awaited her. Still she continued. A wife owed her marriage that much. When she reached him, Sebastian turned. For an instant surprise flickered across his face. Then it vanished. Eleanor. His voice remained polite. Nothing more. "May I speak with you?" she asked softly. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Of course. He escorted her away from the ballroom and into the conservatory adjoining the manor's eastern wing. Glass walls surrounded them. Moonlight filtered through the panes. Winter roses climbed iron trellises, their pale blossoms glowing beneath lantern light. The music from the ballroom became distant. Only silence remained. Eleanor clasped trembling hands before her. "I fear we have become strangers." Sebastian looked away. "You are mistaken." "No," she whispered. "I am not." The words escaped before caution could stop them. "You scarcely look at me anymore." His expression hardened. "Eleanor, I have tried to understand." Her voice quivered despite her efforts. "I have excused every absence, every silence, every cold reply. But tonight I can no longer pretend." Pain flashed briefly in his eyes. Then pride buried it. "What exactly do you wish me to say?" The question stung. She stepped closer. "I wish to know whether you still love me." The conservatory fell utterly still. Outside, snow drifted against the glass. Inside, two hearts stood upon the edge of ruin. Sebastian's face became unreadable. Days of pressure, weeks of arguments with his domineering mother, months of fear regarding inheritance and duty surged through him. Every anxiety he had hidden behind silence suddenly demanded escape. Unfortunately, it escaped in the cruelest possible form. His gaze dropped briefly to her stomach. Then he spoke. "I don't want this child." The words struck harder than any slap. For a heartbeat Eleanor could not breathe, could not think, could not even comprehend what she had heard. Instinctively, both hands moved protectively over her unborn baby. Her eyes widened with horror. The man she loved had not rejected merely a child. He had rejected part of her soul. Behind a nearby doorway, a servant froze. Another heard. Within moments the devastating sentence would travel through the manor like wildfire. But Eleanor no longer cared about society. Only the unbearable ache inside her remained. Tears gathered silently. Sebastian's expression shifted. Regret appeared almost instantly. Yet the damage had already been done. Some wounds arrived too swiftly for apologies to catch them. Without speaking another word, Eleanor turned away. She walked through the conservatory, through the glittering ballroom, and past hundreds of curious eyes. No one dared stop her. No one dared ask questions. Outside, icy rain had begun to fall. A carriage waited at the entrance. As Eleanor disappeared inside, she pressed a trembling hand against her stomach and made a vow through broken tears. If her husband did not want their child, she would protect this baby alone. From the manor steps, Sebastian watched the carriage vanish into the storm. Only then did he realize the 5 words spoken in anger might cost him everything he had ever loved. The journey from London to Ashford House lasted only 2 days, yet to Eleanor Hawthorne it felt like the crossing of an entire lifetime. The carriage wheels rolled through frozen countryside while rain streaked across the windows in silver threads. Fields slept beneath winter frost, and bare trees stretched their skeletal branches toward a sky the color of morning silk. Wrapped in blankets, Eleanor sat silently inside the carriage, one hand resting over the child growing within her. She had not shed another tear since leaving Hawthorne Manor. Grief had settled into something quieter now, something colder. The 5 words remained. They echoed through every mile. "I don't want this child." No matter how fiercely she tried to escape them, they followed. When the carriage finally reached Ashford House, the estate of her late father, dusk had already begun descending across the countryside. The manor was smaller than the ducal residence she had left behind, but its familiar stone walls offered a comfort grandeur never could. Here she had spent her childhood chasing butterflies through gardens and reading novels beside crackling fireplaces. Here she had once believed the world was kind. As servants hurried forward to greet her, Eleanor gathered what remained of her strength and stepped inside. She had returned not as a carefree daughter. She had returned as a wounded wife. The following days unfolded in a strange stillness. Outside, winter deepened. Inside, Eleanor established a routine designed to protect her fragile peace. She spent mornings walking slowly through frost-covered gardens. Afternoons were devoted to correspondence and reading. Evenings passed beside the library fire while wind rattled softly against the windows. She spoke little of Sebastian. When his name surfaced in conversation, she gently redirected the subject. The wound was too fresh. Yet while Eleanor sought refuge in silence, London seemed determined to deny it. Rumors multiplied with astonishing speed. What had begun as whispers at the Christmas ball soon evolved into scandal. Guests repeated fragments of the story. Servants embroidered details. Society transformed private heartbreak into public entertainment. By the second week, newspapers began publishing carefully disguised references to a prominent duke and his estranged wife. Though names were omitted, everyone understood the truth. The speculation grew merciless. Some claimed the marriage had collapsed. Others suggested Sebastian regretted becoming a father. A few even questioned whether reconciliation was possible. Every edition found eager readers. Every rumor sharpened the humiliation. When newspapers occasionally arrived at Ashford House, Eleanor instructed servants to remove them before she could see the headlines. Still, gossip always found a way through. One afternoon, while attending a small church service in the nearby village, she noticed conversations abruptly ending as she approached. Pity lingered in sympathetic glances. Curiosity flickered in others. She lowered her eyes and continued walking. Dignity became her armor. If society expected a spectacle, she would offer none. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Sebastian Hawthorne discovered that regret possessed a cruelty all its own. The moment Eleanor's carriage had vanished into the storm, he had understood the enormity of his mistake. Yet understanding brought no relief. It merely illuminated the wreckage. The grand halls of Hawthorne Manor felt emptier with each passing day. Meals remained untouched. Sleep became elusive. Even estate business, once a reliable distraction, failed to command his attention. Every room reminded him of Eleanor. The music room recalled her laughter. The gardens recalled her patience. The library recalled evenings spent reading together before silence had gradually replaced conversation. Most painful of all was the nursery. A room still unfinished. A room intended for their child. Sebastian stood there often. Sometimes for hours. He would stare at the pale walls and imagine tiny footsteps that might never echo there. The realization hollowed him. For years he had mastered every challenge through discipline and control. Yet now neither title nor wealth offered solutions. He had wounded the one person he could not bear to lose. At last, desperate to repair what he had broken, he began sending gifts. The first was a bouquet of rare white roses. Eleanor returned them unopened. The second was a collection of first-edition novels she had once admired. They returned as well. The third was a delicate silver music box that played her favorite melody. It arrived back at Hawthorne Manor within days. Each rejection stung. Yet Sebastian persisted. Letters followed. Long letters. Honest letters. He wrote late into the night beside candlelight, filling pages with apologies he could never seem to perfect. He attempted to explain pressures she did not fully know. He tried describing fears he had hidden behind pride. Most importantly, he begged forgiveness. None received a reply. Every letter returned sealed and unread. The silence frightened him more than anger ever could. For anger suggested feeling. Silence suggested surrender. One evening, Sebastian sat alone in his study examining the latest unopened letter that had been returned from Ashford House. The wax seal remained unbroken. His apology remained unseen. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. The butler stepped inside. There is a visitor requesting an immediate audience, Your Grace. Sebastian frowned. At this hour? Yes, Your Grace. The servant hesitated. He claims the matter concerns Her Grace. Instantly, Sebastian rose. A cold sensation tightened around his chest. Moments later, an elderly physician entered the room carrying a leather medical case dusted with snow from travel. His expression was grave, and that alone was enough to send dread coursing through Sebastian's veins. The doctor removed his gloves slowly. Then he delivered words that transformed regret into terror. Your Grace, he said quietly, I have come from Ashford House. Lady Eleanor's pregnancy is no longer progressing as expected, and I fear there may be complications. For a moment the room seemed to tilt. The unopened letter slipped from Sebastian's fingers and drifted to the floor. And suddenly, the 5 cruel words he could never take back no longer felt like the greatest threat to his family. Something far worse had begun. The physician's warning transformed Sebastian Hawthorne's world in a single breath. Long after the elderly doctor had finished speaking, the Duke remained motionless beside his desk, staring at nothing. Outside the tall windows of Hawthorne Manor, snow fell steadily across the darkened grounds, coating the estate in a deceptive blanket of peace. Yet within him, panic spread with merciless speed. Lady Eleanor's pregnancy is no longer progressing as expected. The words echoed through his mind. Until that moment, regret had been his greatest torment. Now regret was eclipsed by fear. Fear that he might lose his wife. Fear that he might lose his child. Fear that the last meaningful words Eleanor would ever remember from him were 5 cruel words spoken in anger. Within the hour, he ordered his horse prepared. Servants protested the weather. The roads were dangerous. A storm was gathering across the countryside. Sebastian ignored every warning. Nothing mattered except reaching Eleanor. Wrapped in a heavy winter coat, he rode into the night beneath a sky swollen with snow clouds. Wind slashed across open fields. Ice gathered along his gloves and collar. More than once, his horse stumbled upon frozen ground. Yet he pressed onward, driven by a desperation stronger than exhaustion. Every mile carried him closer to the woman he had failed. Every mile deepened his determination to tell her the truth. Not the excuses he had hidden behind. Not the pride that had poisoned his judgment. The truth. By dawn, Ashford House emerged through the storm like a memory half concealed by mist. Smoke rose from chimneys into the pale winter sky. The familiar stone manor seemed untouched by the chaos of the previous months. Sebastian dismounted before the entrance. For a moment, uncertainty gripped him. He was a duke accustomed to command. Yet he had never felt less powerful. The front door opened before he could gather his thoughts. A servant recognized him immediately and hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to admit him. Her Grace is in the library, the servant finally said. The words sounded less like permission and more like a warning. Sebastian entered. The warmth inside struck him instantly after the bitter cold outdoors. Candlelight glowed softly against polished wood panels. The scent of burning oak drifted through the hallways. Yet no comfort reached him. His attention remained fixed upon a single destination. When he entered the library, he found Eleanor seated beside the fireplace. A book rested unopened upon her lap. Sunlight filtered through tall windows and painted silver highlights across her chestnut hair. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The months apart seemed to gather between them like an invisible wall. Eleanor looked thinner than he remembered, wearier. Yet her quiet dignity remained untouched. The sight of her stole the breath from his lungs. "You should not be here," she said at last. Her voice was calm. That calmness hurt more than anger. "I came as soon as I heard." Her gaze lowered briefly to the flames. "So you heard?" Silence followed. Sebastian stepped closer. "How are you feeling?" "I survive each day." The answer carried no bitterness, only truth. That truth wounded him more deeply than accusation ever could. He reached into his coat and withdrew a letter. The latest one. The one returned unopened. "I wrote to you." "I know. You never read them." "No." The single syllable fell gently between them. Sebastian stared at the untouched envelope. Weeks of apologies remained trapped inside. Words he had desperately needed her to hear. Yet he understood why she had refused them. A letter could not erase what had happened. Neither could flowers, nor gifts, nor titles. Only honesty remained, and honesty demanded courage. "I owe you the truth," he said quietly. Eleanor's eyes lifted toward him. For the first time, genuine emotion flickered behind her composure. "Then speak it." The invitation felt more difficult than any judgment. Sebastian drew a slow breath. "My mother opposed this child from the beginning." A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. She said nothing. Encouraged by the silence, he continued. "She feared an heir would alter family arrangements she spent years constructing. She wanted control over everything, including our future." The fire crackled softly beside them. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. "I fought her at first," he admitted. "Then I allowed her influence to become an excuse for my own fears." Eleanor listened carefully. Not forgiving, not condemning, simply listening. "I convinced myself I was protecting everyone by remaining silent. I buried every concern, every doubt." His voice roughened. "Until that night." Understanding slowly emerged within her expression. Not understanding of his actions. Understanding of the weakness behind them. Yet one question remained. "What fears?" she asked. Sebastian looked away. The answer required exposing wounds he had spent a lifetime concealing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My father never wanted me." The confession lingered in the room. Raw. Unprotected. Real. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Sebastian continued before courage could abandon him. "He considered me an obligation rather than a son. Nothing I accomplished earned his approval. Nothing I became satisfied him." Years of buried pain surfaced in every word. "When I learned you were carrying our child, I should have felt only joy." His jaw tightened. "Instead, I became terrified." Terror of what? His gaze found hers. Of becoming him. The honesty shattered something inside him. For years he had hidden that fear behind pride, responsibility, and silence. Now it stood exposed. Ugly and undeniable. "The greatest shame of my life," he said, "is that I became the very man I once feared." The room fell silent. Neither moved. Neither looked away. For the first time since the Christmas ball, no walls remained between them. Only truth. Slowly, Sebastian lowered himself onto one knee before her chair. The gesture startled Eleanor. Dukes did not kneel. Not easily. Not publicly. Yet pride no longer mattered. Very carefully, he placed his hand upon the curve of her stomach. His expression softened. All traces of rank disappeared. What remained was simply a frightened husband and an imperfect father. "I was wrong," he whispered. The words were meant for both mother and child. "I was cruel. I was cowardly. And if there is any mercy left for me, I pray one day you will know that I never meant those words." Emotion shimmered within Eleanor's eyes. For the first time, her defenses trembled. Not because his apology erased the pain, but because she finally saw the truth beneath it. The silence stretched between them, fragile and uncertain. Then suddenly Eleanor inhaled sharply. Her hand gripped the arm of the chair. A flash of pain crossed her face. Another followed. More intense than the first. Sebastian rose instantly. Fear returned to his chest. "Eleanor?" She pressed trembling fingers against her stomach. The color drained from her face. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the future they had nearly destroyed seemed to shift beneath their feet. And as another wave of pain seized her, both husband and wife realized the child had chosen this very moment to arrive far too soon. Pain transformed the peaceful library into a chamber of sudden urgency. Eleanor gripped the arm of her chair as another contraction surged through her body. The color had drained from her face, leaving her pale against the warm glow of the fireplace. For a brief moment, fear flickered in her eyes, and Sebastian felt his heart lurch. The physician had warned that complications were possible. Now those warnings stood before him in terrifying reality. "Eleanor," he said, moving toward her. She drew a strained breath and forced a fragile smile. "It appears our child has chosen a dramatic entrance." The attempt at humor only deepened his worry. Within minutes, servants were rushing through the corridors of Ashford House. Lamps were lit. Doctors were summoned. Maids prepared the bedchamber. Footsteps echoed across polished floors as the quiet manor transformed into a place of controlled chaos. Outside, snow continued to fall in thick white sheets. Inside, time seemed to move with unbearable speed. Sebastian remained beside Eleanor as she was carefully escorted upstairs. Though pain tightened her features, she refused to cry out. The same dignity that had carried her through public humiliation now carried her through suffering. Watching her, Sebastian felt both admiration and shame. She had endured months of loneliness, months of gossip, months of heartbreak, yet she still possessed more courage than he had ever shown. As the hours passed, the storm outside intensified. Wind rattled the windows. Branches scraped against the stone walls. The entire estate seemed trapped between earth and sky. In Eleanor's chamber, doctors worked tirelessly while servants moved quietly around them. Heated water was carried in. Fresh linens were arranged. Every preparation reflected the growing seriousness of the situation. One of the physicians finally stepped into the corridor where Sebastian waited. The older man's expression was grave. "How is she?" "The labor is progressing too quickly." Sebastian's stomach tightened. "And the child?" "We are doing everything possible." It was not the reassurance he wanted. It was the only one available. Hours crawled forward. Sebastian remained outside the room, pacing beneath candlelight. His hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Every muffled sound from inside the chamber felt like a blade against his nerves. For perhaps the first time in his life, there was nothing he could command. Nothing he could purchase. Nothing he could control. The realization humbled him completely. Near midnight, another carriage arrived. The sound of wheels crunching through snow drew attention throughout the estate. Moments later, a familiar figure entered the manor. Lady Margaret Hawthorne, Sebastian's mother. Even at her age, she carried herself with formidable authority. Her dark gown was immaculate despite the weather, and her sharp eyes immediately surveyed the household as though it belonged to her. The atmosphere changed the moment she appeared. Servants straightened. Conversations quieted. Old habits of obedience resurfaced instantly. When she found Sebastian in the corridor, her expression hardened. "So it is true." "It is." She removed her gloves calmly. "You should return to London." The statement stunned him. His exhaustion vanished. "What did you say?" "This situation requires practical judgment, not emotional displays." For years, those words would have silenced him. Tonight they only ignited something long buried. Eleanor cried out from within the chamber. The sound pierced the hallway. Sebastian's gaze never left his mother's face. "I am staying." Lady Margaret folded her hands. "Your responsibilities extend beyond one woman and one child." The sentence struck him like a physical blow. For years she had spoken of duty, inheritance, legacy, family reputation, all the things he had once mistaken for strength. Now, standing outside the room where his wife fought for her life, those priorities suddenly seemed hollow. Another painful cry came from behind the door. Sebastian felt something inside him finally break free. "No." The single word echoed through the corridor. His mother stared at him. He continued before she could respond. "For years I allowed you to define duty for me." The older woman stiffened. "I listened when I should have spoken." His voice grew stronger. "I obeyed when I should have protected." Shock flickered across her face. It was perhaps the first time her son had openly challenged her. Servants watched from a distance. Doctors paused nearby. The entire household seemed suspended in the moment. Lady Margaret's expression darkened. "You would disgrace your family for sentiment?" Sebastian looked toward Eleanor's chamber, then back at his mother. What came next carried the force of absolute conviction. I would surrender every title I possess before I abandoned my wife or my child. Silence followed. Profound. Complete. No one moved. No one breathed. For the first time in years, Sebastian felt entirely certain of who he was. Not a duke. Not an heir. Not a son struggling to earn approval. A husband. A father. And nothing mattered more. His mother's face revealed something unexpected. Not anger. Defeat. She had spent years shaping him into the man she believed he should become. Tonight that man had disappeared. In his place stood someone stronger. Someone she could no longer control. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The corridor remained silent long after she vanished. Yet Sebastian felt no triumph. Only urgency. Only fear. Only love. Then suddenly a door opened. A physician emerged. Your Grace. Sebastian stepped forward immediately. The child is coming. The next hour became a blur of prayer and terror. He waited beside the chamber door while snow battered the windows. Every second stretched endlessly. Every muffled voice heightened the tension. His entire world seemed balanced upon the edge of a knife. Then it happened. A cry. Small. Fragile. Miraculous. The cry of a newborn child. Sebastian closed his eyes. Relief struck with such force that his knees nearly gave way. A doctor appeared moments later carrying a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. You have a son, Your Grace. For one glorious moment, joy eclipsed every sorrow. Sebastian looked down at the infant. His son. His child. The very child he had once rejected with 5 unforgivable words. Emotion overwhelmed him. Tears filled his eyes. The baby stirred gently in the blankets. Alive. Beautiful. Perfect. Yet the celebration lasted only seconds. Another physician emerged from the chamber. The joy vanished from his expression the instant Sebastian saw the man's face. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. How is Eleanor? The doctor hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Fear returned with devastating force. The birth was difficult, the physician said quietly. Sebastian felt his pulse stop. We have stopped the bleeding for now, but Lady Eleanor remains unconscious. The corridor seemed to darken around him. He looked toward the closed chamber door. Toward the room where his wife lay between life and death. In one arm he held the son he had nearly lost. Beyond that door lay the woman he could not bear to lose at all. And as dawn remained hours away and the storm raged beyond the windows, Sebastian realized the longest night of his life was only beginning. The storm raged beyond the windows of Ashford House, but Sebastian Hawthorne barely noticed it. Time itself seemed to have narrowed into a single corridor, a single room, a single fragile breath belonging to the woman he loved. His newborn son rested in his arms. Eleanor lay unconscious beyond the chamber door. Never had life and death stood so close together. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Candles burned low. Servants moved softly through the manor. Doctors entered and exited Eleanor's room with expressions that revealed little and reassured no one. Sebastian refused to leave. Several times the physicians encouraged him to rest. He ignored them. Several times servants offered food. He declined. Nothing mattered except Eleanor. The tiny infant sleeping against his chest occasionally stirred, releasing soft sounds that echoed through the quiet corridor. Each sound filled Sebastian with wonder and guilt in equal measure. This child existed because of Eleanor's courage, because of her strength, because of her willingness to endure suffering that would have broken many others. And yet when she had needed reassurance most, he had wounded her with cruelty. The memory haunted him. Again and again he heard his own voice. I don't want this child. 5 words. 5 careless words. Words capable of destroying trust, dignity, and love. He would spend the remainder of his life wishing he could take them back. As dawn slowly approached, pale light began filtering through the windows. The snowstorm weakened. The violent winds gradually faded into silence. Nature itself seemed exhausted. Sebastian sat beside Eleanor's bedside at last, refusing to move even after physicians permitted him entry. The baby rested nearby in a small cradle while doctors continued monitoring her condition. She looked impossibly fragile. Her skin was pale. Her breathing remained shallow. Yet she was still there. Still fighting. Sebastian reached for her hand. It felt cool against his own. He carefully intertwined their fingers. Then he spoke. Not because he expected her to hear. Not because he expected forgiveness. But because silence no longer felt acceptable. I was afraid. His voice was rough from exhaustion. I spent so many years trying to become a man worthy of my title that I forgot how to become a man worthy of you." The room remained still. He lowered his gaze. "I thought strength meant control." A bitter smile touched his lips. "It turns out strength means standing beside the people you love when they need you most." Emotion tightened his throat. "You deserved that husband." His thumb gently brushed her hand. "And I failed to be him." For a long time only the crackling fireplace answered. Then something shifted. A slight movement. So small he almost imagined it. Sebastian's head lifted instantly. Eleanor's fingers moved within his grasp. His heart stopped. Moments later, her eyelids fluttered. The physicians rushed forward. Sebastian rose so quickly that his chair nearly overturned. Slowly, painfully, Eleanor opened her eyes. Confusion appeared first. Then recognition. Her gaze found Sebastian. For several seconds neither spoke. The silence contained months of grief, longing, regret, and love. At last Eleanor whispered a single word. "Sebastian." He had never heard anything more beautiful. Relief overwhelmed him completely. The breath he seemed to have been holding for an entire night finally escaped. Tears filled his eyes. He did not hide them. For once, pride had no place between them. "You are awake." Her lips curved faintly. "Barely." The weak attempt at humor nearly broke him. A physician confirmed she would recover. Exhaustion remained. Healing remained. But she would live. Those words felt miraculous. The room gradually emptied, leaving husband and wife alone together. Morning sunlight spilled softly across the blankets. Outside, the storm had finally ended. Inside, another storm waited for resolution. Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the cradle. "Our child?" Sebastian carefully lifted the infant and brought him closer. The moment she saw their son, tears gathered in her eyes. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the chaos surrounding his arrival. Eleanor touched his tiny hand. A mother's love immediately transformed her expression. For a long moment she simply stared. Then she looked at Sebastian. The unspoken question lingered between them. "Do you love him? Do you want him? Do you regret him?" Sebastian understood every word she had not spoken. Carefully, he lowered himself beside her bed. His voice remained quiet. "I was wrong." The confession came without hesitation, without excuse, without qualification. "I was wrong the night I spoke those words." Emotion shimmered within his eyes. "I was wrong every day afterward." Eleanor listened silently. "I do not expect forgiveness because I ask for it." His gaze never left hers. "I only want you to know the truth." The room seemed to hold its breath. Then came the words he had carried within him for months. "The 5 words I spoke will haunt me for the rest of my life." His voice cracked. "But if you allow it, I will spend the rest of that life proving they were a lie." Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. Not because the pain vanished. Not because trust had magically returned. But because she recognized sincerity. The man before her was no longer hiding behind pride. He was finally vulnerable. Finally honest. Finally worthy of belief. Months passed. Winter surrendered to spring. The countryside awakened beneath sunlight and blossoms. Gardens flourished. Trees burst into color. Streams carried sparkling reflections beneath clear skies. Life returned. So did Eleanor. Strength gradually replaced weakness. Laughter slowly returned to the halls of Ashford House. Most importantly, trust began growing again. Not through grand speeches. Not through expensive gifts. But through countless small acts. Sebastian remained present. He listened. He stayed. He learned. Every promise was supported by action. Every wound received patience. Their son became the center of their world. And with every passing day, the distance between husband and wife diminished. Eventually they returned to London. News of their arrival spread quickly throughout society. An invitation soon followed. A prestigious spring gathering attended by the most influential members of the aristocracy. The very people who had whispered about Eleanor's humiliation. The very people who had feasted upon her heartbreak. The ballroom glittered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Music drifted through the air. Conversations flowed like wine. Yet when Sebastian and Eleanor entered together, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. The same society that had once pitted Eleanor now watched with curiosity. Sebastian led her toward the center of the ballroom. She wore a magnificent gown of pale blue silk. Confidence had returned to her posture. Dignity had never left it. Before assembled nobles, Sebastian stopped. Then he produced a velvet box. Murmurs spread instantly. Opening it, he revealed a magnificent Hawthorne family heirloom, a necklace passed through generations. The room watched in astonishment. Sebastian fastened it around Eleanor's neck. Then he turned toward the gathered crowd. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "I wish there to be no misunderstanding." Silence deepened. He gently took Eleanor's hand. "This woman is the bravest person I have ever known." Emotion shone openly in his eyes. "The greatest honor of my life is being her husband." Gasps rippled throughout the room. Yet Sebastian continued. "And the greatest blessing God has ever granted me is the family she gave me." Every whisper died. Every rumor collapsed. Every cruel judgment lost its power. Because the truth stood before them all. Not perfect love. Not effortless love. But love tested by suffering and strengthened by repentance. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. This time they were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of healing. Slowly she squeezed his hand. A simple gesture. Yet it carried the answer Sebastian had hoped for since that terrible Christmas night. Forgiveness. The orchestra resumed playing. Applause spread through the ballroom. But Sebastian heard none of it. His attention remained fixed upon Eleanor, the woman he had nearly lost, the woman who had found the courage to love him again. Years later, people would remember the scandal. Some would remember the cruel words. Others would remember the dramatic reconciliation. But those details mattered little, because the true ending belonged not to gossip or tragedy, but to a family that survived both. And as spring sunlight poured through the ballroom windows, illuminating husband and wife standing together at last, Sebastian understood a truth he would never forget. 5 cruel words had nearly destroyed everything. A lifetime of devotion became the answer that healed it forever.